All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
It's really hard for small schools to stay in the black doing it yourself because you don't have that economy of scale. So I see smaller schools fitting better with a vended meal sort of option where it's coming to you, it's packaged, you don't need as much staff to just hand out the food. The con to that is going to be the food might not be as fresh as you want. You're really going off of a vendor's menu. You don't have a lot of choice. If your parents are unhappy and complaining about the food or your students, you're probably pretty limited in what you can do to fix that. Versus having your own kitchen, you can really serve your students meals that, are culturally appropriate and that likely they want to eat. You can make those decisions on the fly.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, everyone. My guest today is Emily Chatelain. Emily is the CEO and founder of School Food and Wellness Group. A little bit about Emily's background. She brings years of experience providing program management and compliance, operations, fiscal policy, and human resources support to public schools, leaders, and districts across the country. Additionally, Emily leads the 3 O'Clock Project, a Louisiana-based nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide children with access to healthy meals after school and throughout the summer months. She's a 2009 undergraduate of the College of Agriculture at Louisiana State University and a 2011 graduate of the MBA program at the University of New Orleans. Emily began her career in 2012 as an operations consultant for a local charter school in downtown Baton Rouge. And after that school, as well as several others, inquired about improving their meal service via the National School Lunch Program, Emily saw a real opportunity and took the entrepreneur's leap of faith, founding School Food and Wellness Group in 2015. The organization has grown steadily on a national scale and now serves over 150 clients across 30 different states. In our conversation today, Emily and I break down the business behind running a school food program, some of the challenges and missteps that schools are taking, and some solutions as well. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Emily, let's talk about school food. Why are you so passionate about this topic, and why should school leaders be too?
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me on. And this is such an important topic. I'm pretty passionate about food kind of equity, and all kids having access to healthy food, no matter their background and where they live. So it's important to me. And I think every school leader should equally care about it because kids who are hungry can't learn. That's as simple as it gets.
That's a pretty good distillation of the challenge. I love it. So this, to me, since this is a podcast that focuses on the business side of operating a successful school, to me, serving school food seems at face value kind of like a straightforward idea. Like you said, kids who are hungry can't learn. That feels like something we can all agree on. But the actual process of getting a healthy meal in front of a student is a challenge for a lot of schools. So why do you think that is? Like, help us better understand the mechanics behind actually getting a healthy meal in front of a student so that they can learn more effectively.
To me, school food programs are essentially like you're running a restaurant, right? Or you're running a catering company. So it comes with its own set of challenges. You have to set its own budget. You have to hire. It really depends on your infrastructure, what What does your kitchen look like? Do you have a kitchen? So I think that it can be hard to sort of think of it that way, especially whenever your goal or your mission as a school leader is to educate kids. I don't think they're always prioritizing the meal program, not on purpose, but their priority is to keep kids safe and educate them. But I would argue that feeding them, especially in public school settings, is equally important.
From the process of like actually starting this, so as you mentioned, I think it makes a lot of sense that a school leader is passionate about the academic outcomes. They maybe are not thinking, oh, I'm also operating a restaurant or a catering company. I think that's a good analogy. Super hard businesses to run, notoriously some of the most challenging businesses to run in the private sector in general, restaurants or food service companies. Where does all this actually start? Like, is it a money challenge? Is it a facility challenge? Like, where does running a school food program really start from your perspective, just to kind of set the stage for the rest of the conversation?
I think it all starts with the money, right? With the budget. Then I think it starts with what your facility looks like. So if you think about how to project out, let's say you're a new school leader, or let's say you're opening a new school, you have to really sit and think through, okay, how many kids are going to be coming through this space? What does my space look like? Can I cook on site? Do I have the equipment to do so? Because your budget really sets kind of what your capabilities are or become. And then you might have all these dreams of feeding kids. We were working with a school in Texas who said, our priority is going to be the food program. Well, after stumbling through how they were going to start up, they got handed a facility. As you know, charter schools often can't pick where they're going to be, that didn't have a kitchen. So they really had to pivot with, how are we going to feed kids healthy food? We have no kitchen. So it started making them look outside the box. So I think it all starts with, where are you going to feed these kids? What do you have to feed them with? And what does your money look like?
So I want to ask more about how the facility impacts the decision on the model. Like, to your point, the school in Texas you mentioned, they had one idea, but then their facility dictated the model, I assume, that they had to go with. But before we get into some of the different potential models for delivering food service, from a budget, like you mentioned, budget and facility are kind of the two starting pillars. From a budgetary perspective, does every school start from the same place? Like, does everyone have the same level of funding? How does the budget side of things work? Like, how does the money impact the school food decisions?
The answer is kind of yes, right? Everybody does get the same funding, and I'll explain that. But I work with schools who have an annual budget of $100,000 to school networks and systems that have a $5 million budget. It all is based on the number of students who are eating. So you could have a really small budget if you've got 5,000 students, but only 1,000 of them are eating. It all comes down to your reimbursement per meal. So it's really crucial in budgeting. 100% of your kids aren't going to eat, even if you're 100% free and reduced. So kids just are picky, right? Especially if you have a high school set of students. So you really need to look at how many kids are going to come through your lunch line, because you're reimbursed based on the number of meals that you serve, and then that status of free, reduced, and paid. Almost every public school participates in the National School Lunch Program, so it's federal funding, and the federal government reimburses you based on those meals. And then some states apply additional state funding, but it really varies state to state. So your formula really begins with projecting out how many kids you're going to feed every day, a breakfast and a lunch. And then, you can kind of start to play with your budget, right? This is my expected revenue that I have. And am I going to need general fund dollars to support that? Or can this be self-sustaining within the federal and state reimbursement that I get?
And who actually is doing that calculation? So I think the formula is really helpful as a framework for deciding what the budget is going to look like in the upcoming year. Who ultimately is responsible? And I'm sure the answer varies based on the size of the school. If it's your first year as a school versus, we're a 20 campus CMO. But from your perspective, who are the key stakeholders that should be thinking about this? Is it just the food service director, or do you really view this as an operation that multiple stakeholders on the leadership team should be thinking about?
I really think it should start with your founder and your board. Hopefully, right, they have a vision as to how important this is to them, because they're setting their instructional minutes, they're setting their school calendar, they're setting their bell schedule right around, well, how much time are they going to allocate for lunch? How much time are they going to allocate for recess? Are kids eating in the classroom? Are kids coming through a lunch line? All of those decisions really lean on one another and kind of all come back to the budget. So in a perfect world, you have your school leader, founder, executive director working with your finance team, working with whoever it is you've appointed to run your meal program, which we can get into that. But that really looks different school to school. And it, again, starts on the size of the school. So I work with a lot of new schools. And the first question is, well, is there any funding to start our meal program? Can we buy equipment, or, right, what funding is out there? And unfortunately, there are no federal funds for new schools or growing schools to start. You kind of have to come up with that budget first. You only get reimbursed again for the meals that you serve. So if you're a large network, let's say you're a CMO and you have 10 schools and you've been operating, you likely have a fund or a surplus or something to start from each year. But if you're a brand new school, you're really starting at scratch. And so you're going to have to invest and dip into general fund to kind of get yourself going.
Super interesting. So let's talk through some of the different models to approach this, because to your point, whether you're a new school, whether you have been around for a couple of years, or whether you're a large network, everyone has to make a decision of their model. And this ties back to your comments around facility and whether or not there's a kitchen on premise. Can you just give us a sense, or maybe a short summary on the different types of models that are out there? I don't even know what the different kinds are. So maybe you could walk us through the options a school has when they are deciding to launch their program or evaluate their current program.
Absolutely. So it does kind of fall into a few buckets. You either have the facilities and are able to, what we kind of say, self-prep, meaning you do your own food. You hire a chef, you hire the staff, you buy the food, you store it right in your refrigerator, your freezer, and you cook it each day and serve. So you're kind of managing top to bottom your restaurant, if you will. You're hiring, you're setting your menu, you're planning all of that. You obviously have to have a kitchen, a fully functioning kitchen to do that. So that's that bucket. Now, whether you have a kitchen or not, if you've got a kitchen, you don't have to run it. So option 2 would be, maybe you've got a kitchen, but you don't want to hire and do all of that work and deal with figuring out your menu. So you can hire a food service management company. Every state is going to have a very specific process for that under procurement and contracts. But a food service management company could come in and run your kitchen for you. So they're bringing their staff and they're managing it for you and producing, the end product of food. If you don't have a kitchen at all, you're going to have to contract out to a centralized kitchen, usually a food vendor, what we consider a vended meal contract. So this is going to be a catering company, hopefully who's knowledgeable, who can produce the meals off-site and then deliver it to you every day. And your staff receive the meals and serve the food. So that's kind of 3 different buckets. You're doing it all yourself, your own staff. You're contracting your staff out and having a company come in, or you're just ordering meals from a vended meal company. And the very last thing I'll say, sometimes I see school districts just provide that service. So it's sort of like an FSMC. When you fall under the school district's umbrella and they're providing you meals, that's a little unique. Again, it kind of depends on who your authorizer is and where you are, if that's even an option.
Okay, interesting. So as I hear you talk through each of those options, what I immediately jump to is I would imagine there's this decision point as a school leader where you're saying, well, it sounds like a lot of work to run a full-scale restaurant and order our own food and make sure the food is delivered on time and the chef knows what they're doing. And to me, as you walk through each of those models, it almost got easier and easier on paper. But I also would imagine that there's some pros and cons to each of these for the experience for students and ultimately what school leaders and board members are hoping to see out of their food program. What would you say if we just talk about those 3, maybe 4 buckets that you just walked through? What are some of the pros and cons of each? You don't have to go through a long laundry list, but maybe just like 1 or 2 pros and cons of each of those, just as you all have worked with schools that cover each of those models.
Pros and cons there are to all of them. It's tough. I've seen schools be self-op and switch to FSMC. I've seen schools have an FSMC and switch to self-op. I'd say the pro, I bet the beauty of, every school leader probably wants their own beautiful commercial kitchen that has a garden out back, right? That engages students and parents and they're cooking beautiful meals and serving their kids every day. But when you drill down on all the other things that you have to fit into a school day, that's not always that realistic. And again, it comes down to the size of your school. It's really hard for small schools to stay in the black doing it yourself because you don't have that economy of scale. It's going to be expensive for you to buy food, produce it, serve it. So schools that are small, meaning less than 500 students, I don't often see that they're self-opping this. They don't have a big staff. They don't have a food service director. They probably don't have a dietitian, all these individual roles. You really need to do that well. So I see smaller schools fitting better with a vended meal sort of option where it's coming to you, it's packaged. You don't need as much staff to just hand out the food. The con to that is going to be the food might not be as fresh as you want. You're really going off of a vendor's menu. You don't have a lot of choice. If your parents are unhappy and complaining about the food or your students, you're probably pretty limited in what you can do to fix that. Versus having your own kitchen, you can really serve your students meals that are culturally appropriate and that likely they want to eat. You can make those decisions on the fly. But the pro to having a food service management company come in, which is what we see a lot of networks do, is that you don't have to deal with the staff and the hiring and the equipment and the menu. It makes it easier. However, I will say if you're not managing them properly, it actually can cost you a lot more headaches. So it's so hard to fit like a one stamp, this is really good. It comes down to really analyzing what your options are and kind of vetting each one. Do a budget for each one, do a planning session, just working through all the different ways to do it and then picking the right one. And then it might change, that might 2 years in, you might say this isn't working and you got to redo it.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that. So you mentioned you've seen schools switch models, and it totally makes sense that kind of whiteboarding out all the different scenarios and deciding what fits your context best and your budget. I would imagine that whiteboarding session changes as the school changes. How hard is it, just in your experience, for a school to switch models? And maybe that depends on which model you're going to. Obviously, if you're going from a vended meal all the way to full-scale kitchen, that switch requires more effort. But do you see the switch happening pretty frequently? Is this something that a school might switch up every couple of years? Or what have you seen on the changing models front?
So most schools, this is the advice we give. Starting out, don't take it all on, right? It's really easy to fail, especially because this program is so nuanced. It's got so many small little, you got to check this box and have this paper or else an auditor comes in and blows it up. So we have seen schools sort of roll it out. They might start with vended meals, getting their feet wet on the paperwork and the reporting. And then as they grow and get larger, they can then go out to bid and get an FSMC. And then after a year or two, maybe they've now got more money. They can build a kitchen or do a capital fundraising campaign, or maybe they're building a new school anyway, and they can plan for a kitchen in that new school. So the progression is pretty normal to maybe do 1 or 2 years as each kind of model. And then it's important to note that you can't extend past 5 years on renewing a contract anyway, right? The federal procurement laws are that you have to renew your contracts each year and or go out to bid. So we work with a lot of networks that just their board says you have to go out to bid every year. I really don't advise that. That's pretty disruptive. But one good example, we're working with a charter network in DC. They have 3 schools, and their principal overall has kind of said, hey, this is important. We really want to build in a plan of having kitchens and cooking on site. So they are putting together kind of like a 3-year projection of saying, okay, we know it's going to take money and infrastructure, so let's work on this for 3 years. So I think that's a really good model to follow is let's build out our 3 to 5 year plan. You might not have what you want now, but how can you get there taking your time?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And knowing that there is a hierarchy you can move through if you want to get to an end goal without needing to kind of bite it all off at the beginning. I wanted to ask you, just kind of switching to, because your organization works with schools on everything soup to nuts related to the school food program. And I was curious to ask you, we've talked a little bit about the pillars that allow the school food program to run. We've talked about some of the models. What are some of the most common challenges that you see schools running into when it comes to running an effective school food program? And you can answer this based on however you want, based on specific models, like the delivery model, or just kind of in general. What would you say are some of the most frequent things that your organization is working with schools on? Because I would imagine there's some common trends.
I think a big issue we see is staffing. Whether you contract this out or not, finding the staff to oversee and run this is always a struggle. We often find that the management of this program got handed sort of to the business ops person who doesn't know, right? Like they're in the education world and they don't know anything about this federal meal program, but no one else on the team would take it on. So it goes to your operations person. Sometimes maybe they worked at another school where they kind of gleaned a few things from that, or a public school district where they saw it. But I think that's the number one issue, because it does really take foresight and planning to do this well. And if you don't have a good plan, right, if you don't have a good human that's managing this and knows what to do when and how to be, proactive on implementing a good meal program, you're going to have problems. And then turnover. Let's say you do have a really good person, but they hold all the knowledge and then they leave mid-year. That's usually when we get a phone call that's like, we lost our person and lo and behold, we have an audit in a month, help. So I think staffing is a big issue across the board of finding a good person. And then kind of hand in hand with that, it's going to be staying on top of all the compliance that comes with this program. Auditors can go back 3 years and think of these big clients where this is a $5 million line item. Like that's a big thing you can mess up, right? And then given the past 3 years, we've actually seen schools get a lot more money, a lot more funding around COVID and supply chain assistance. So another small story, I was talking with one of our clients we just consult on the side for, and through a project that we're doing with them, they discovered that they had almost $1 million in these supply chain assistance funds that they didn't even know. And now they don't know how to, they didn't know how to spend it, right? And it's all going to come, their strings are always attached, right? When the federal government gives you money. So it's the more money, more problems. So again, it's you got to have somebody to put eyes on it and really understand it. And I often come across charter schools who are just blowing and going and haven't really dedicated staff to this program.
Really interesting. So we've got staffing and we've got compliance and the interplay between those two. And it certainly seems like even if someone had done a good job of documenting this, if you get someone new who has no experience with it, it's probably challenging to feel confident taking over a program like this. Well, let's talk about some of the solutions then. So if those are some of the common problems that you all run into, if you had to give maybe like a top 2 to 3 solutions for running a smooth school food program and getting nutrient meals in front of kids, what would you say? Like, knowing that there's a ton of variables, like we talked about, and you alluded several times that the size, the stage, the kind of scale of the school's operation dictates a lot of things. But if you had to offer some kind of blanket solutions or advice to school leaders or ops leaders who might be listening to this, what comes to mind for you?
So let's start at the end. If the end goal is to really have a robust nutrition program that is highly engaged with your parents, with your students, you have staff that really cares about their jobs and what they're doing, they're serving kids with a smile every day, right? I think that's everybody's goal. Definitely, right? Let's reduce the amount of parents that are calling us and complaining, right? They have enough things to complain about. Don't give them something else. I think to get there where you can really thoughtfully think of how to feed these kids and keep them focused, right? It goes back to really planning properly for this and allocating dedicated staff to this, whether that means dipping into your general fund or not, because you have to think through your software needs, your equipment needs, your schedule, right? How will kids physically come through the line? Do you have time afterwards to do all the compliant paperwork? So my advice would be to, one, allocate time to plan for this. And in that planning is your budget. There is no reason to lose a ton of money on this unless you're serving like steak and salmon every day and you just, right? Like you're like, yeah, we're going to really go above and beyond. You can do this and have a fairly balanced budget. You just have to plan for it. So top 3 would say planning, staff it well, and then create a 3 to 5 year budget and then track it. I can't tell you how many times we've kind of jumped in and we looked at a budget and we had to notify the school, hey, did you realize you're $50,000 in the hole and like you're projected to now be $100,000 by the end of the year? Like, are you looking at this? And they're just not really comparing it back to their original forecast because it's just a small line item. So it can get out of hand quickly, but planning, staffing, budget, and with that recipe, you should be able to get to a pretty comfortable meal program.
Okay. PSB, planning, staffing, budget. I love it. Really, really practical and tactical advice. So Emily, as we wrap up here, where can people find out more about your organization, School Food and Wellness Group? Someone's listening to this and they're thinking, hey, our school food program could use some assistance and we could use a partner to talk through some of these things. Where can people learn more about your work?
I say visit our website. It's www.sfwgroup.org. We have a blog and we actually do free monthly webinars. We kind of pick a relevant topic to that month and those are open and free. We just did one on procurement. It's kind of procurement season coming up. So yeah, I'd say check out our website. We're not as active on social media because we're just really busy, but yeah, you can contact us through that.
So great. We'll link to your website and any upcoming webinars in the show notes. Are there other resources that you recommend? Are there organizations that provide funding, like additional funding for school food programs, or are doing research in this space? I guess I'm just curious if there's other resources that you've found helpful or that specific states have a good repository when it comes to school food programs. Anything else that comes to mind on that front?
It's funny, most people, like you can find information, but it's like out there in bits and pieces. And even state agencies, like there's no one stop shop of like, here's how to run a school food program, right? It's because there's so many aspects to it. So we try to wrangle all the information that's out there. We actually have a training library with all the different topics kind of that we've created ourselves. There's a couple of organizations out there. Child Nutrition Institute, they do trainings. The Chef Ann Foundation does a lot of grants. They recently have been doing a lot of grants with USDA, and they have a really cool website with like recipes and management tools So there's a couple. I'll have to send you a link so you can post it for any listeners to kind of use like a resource avenue.
Perfect. Love it. Awesome. Well, Emily, this was great. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your expertise. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@buyq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.